All right, it is 2 o'clock and welcome to the Northeastern IPM Center Partnership Program RFA Webinar. I'm Jana Hexter and I have here with me David Lane. You can say hello.
Hello.
There you go. And we're going to be answering your questions that you might have around the RFA and tell you a little bit about the background of the RFA and point out some things that might be important for you to know. So thanks for taking the time to do this and watching this recording if you're watching the recording later. So let's move straight into this. We welcome your questions. In fact, we have a whole hour. We do not have an hour's worth of content to share with you. And I am not going to repeat ad nauseum what is in the RFA. I'm just going to mention some highlights. And David is going to talk to you about the evaluation portion, which is important. But this is a great time for your questions. So there are no stupid questions. And probably if you have a question, somebody else does. And so please feel free to ask them. If you scroll your mouse over the screen, and you'll see there's a little window that will pop up at the bottom or the top. And about in the middle of that, there is a Q&A box. So if you put a question in there, I will see it pop up and we can answer your questions as we go along. And you can also ask them anonymously. There's a feature when you write the question that you can choose to be anonymous. So we have 3 RFAs, and there are some little variations between the 3. We used to have it all as 1, but it's too complicated, so we split them in 3. So the issues RFA focuses on conducting experiments and doing research. The IPM working group focuses on establishing collaborations, and the communications focuses on communicating science to the public. And the issues are the larger of the grants. There's a maximum of $50,000 for that. The working groups, it's a maximum of $20,000, and the communications is a maximum of $20,000. And typically, we have $250,000 available, and typically we fund around 8 proposals, sometimes 9, sometimes 7, just kind of depending on the mix. The deadline is November 15th at 5 o'clock. It is automatic. It just kind of, the system shuts down at 5 o'clock. We have had in the last few years people who have submitted at 5:01, 5:02, and 5:03, and we just don't review those. So do not leave it until the afternoon of November 15th to try and submit this, because if you have problems, you may miss the deadline. There's nothing I can do, in all fairness, to put it into the review pool. So try and put it in a few days before. So on our website, we have this little diagram that helps you decide what kind of, which RFA applies to your project. And I'm just going to walk you through it. So the first question is, does it result in a measurable change in behavior or conditions? If the answer to that is yes, is it a scientific experiment that includes analysis? If the answer to that is yes, will you demonstrate or present the research findings? If the answer to that is yes, then you end up with an issues project. If the answer to the very first question of does it result in measurable changes in behavior or conditions is no, then the next question is, does it only disseminate science-based information? If the answer to that is yes, then the next question is, could the information be compiled and distributed? If the answer to that is yes, then that would take you to a communications project. And so I'm just also seeing, so to get to a working group, it would be something that disseminates science-based information, brings people together around a defined topic, and produces a white paper or position paper. Sometimes working groups do publications, and that would lead you to working group. So. All right, and you can always contact me if you're not quite sure. That's one of the common questions that comes up. Or also you can reach out to our executive director, Deb Grantham. She is new in the position, so you might want to try both of us, and between the two of us, we'll get your question answered. So for 2019, these are the things to pay attention to. Projects are proposed to evaluate commercial or research grade products without explicitly stating how they will also be tested as part of an IPM approach will not be supported by a grants program. Issues projects that include an 1890s institution can apply for $60,000, and we really want to encourage those collaborations. And we recognize that when you have a limit of $50,000 in a collaboration, it makes the budget really tight. So we have extended it to $60,000 so that it can support that kind of collaboration. And you can just Google a list of 1890s institutions. That's not too hard to find. If your proposal is a resubmission, you need to put in a statement about how you've responded to last year's review. That's very helpful. I'm going to talk a little bit now about the review process. We have 6 reviewers. They're from outside of the region, so they're all in the West, South, or Midwest. We are very careful about making sure that there's no conflict of interest between your project and any collaborators that they've had, and it's the review process is as fair as we can possibly make it. My background is I've raised $70 million in writing grant proposals over the last couple of decades, and so it's very near and dear to my heart that this is a fair process and that things are well read, thought through carefully, and scored carefully. And then we'll let you know, usually by mid-February, what the results are. So, okay, and we scroll forward. We also made a small change this year. With working group projects, we used to have a maximum of $20,000. And what was happening was routinely those projects were not spending $20,000. And we would have anywhere from, $10,000 to $5,000 left that would come back to us at the end. And so I was looking at it and thinking this is a problem because we could have actually funded another project if we had funded at a lower level. So last year we cut it down to $10,000 and we had fewer applications and we think that may be the reason why. So what we've done this year is there's a maximum of $10,000 to $20,000 for a working group. And if you want to go at the higher end of the range, you'll want to put in a really good justification about why you are going at the maximum of the $20,000, because we've seen so many of these projects where they don't actually spend that 20. So you want to make it really explicit and mention very carefully why you came up with that number. And we'd be happy to fund you, but we just want to make sure that we're not going to end up, with money at the end and when we could have funded another project cumulatively. So we have a really great feature on our website that is just here called Find a Colleague. And what you can do in that is put in your profile with your name, your organization, your research interests, and what kind of collaborators you're looking for. And you can also find collaborators. So if you're looking for someone, for example, from an 1890s institution, or you're looking for someone in another state, or with a different kind of expertise that might complement yours, I suggest you go to the Find a Colleague site and see what you can find. It's new. We only just put it up last year. So please put a profile in there. We're trying to get it populated and have it be a really useful resource for people. And we're going to scroll over now to David, and he's going to talk about the evaluation. Let me just see if there are any questions before we move on. We have no questions, so please feel free to pop them in there and we will answer them as we go along. So,
hello, everyone. So what is evaluation? One moment.
We just have a little computer glitch here. There you go. Okay.
So it is a robust evaluation plan and an effective method to report on the results of the project. So when are the evaluation plans and a logic model required? These are required for IPM working groups and IPM communication proposals. These are not required for IPM issues proposals. Your research design should include robust evaluation measures within it for the issues proposal. So I'd like to begin with this slide. It's a quote from Stephen Covey in The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Begin with the end in mind. So when we're thinking about our projects, think about what are the desired impacts. If everything were to go well, our dreams were to come true, what would be the desired impacts at the end? So the reason we like to think about the broader impacts is we are the Northeastern IPM Center, and we're partnering with researchers to create region-appropriate data and information over long time scales. And so you can see in this model, we attempt to have data-based planning, develop the most up-to-date understanding of the current and emerging issues, and then address needs and gaps. And so we then look to partner with researchers and implement the research, do good evaluation, document the results, and then those results are used to inform the next round of research for a regional approach to IPM that covers long time spans. So keep the end in mind as you proceed. This slide discusses the importance of baseline data. So we realize that many of your projects will be creating baseline data, but for those of you who already have baseline data, we'd like you to document that in a pre-program form, and then follow-up data or post-evaluation to show the change that your project has achieved in behavior or awareness, knowledge, skill sets, adoption of IPM practices, or broad impacts like condition changes in the environment or economics or society. So again, this slide on planning and evaluation really encourages us to, as step 1, plan from long-term to short-term. So think about long-term impacts and some possible measures of those, then work backwards to intermediate or behavior-based changes. Then short-term impacts would be knowledge, awareness, skills that are learned. And we realize that in the projects that we fund, often we're just dealing with short-term impacts. But again, we want to keep the end in mind because our goal is to create broader regional impacts eventually over longer time scales. So step 1 is to plan from long-term to short-term. Step 2, evaluate from short-term to long-term.
So maybe I could pop in and just say something here. These are called partnership projects for a reason, and we really do like to partner with the people that we fund, so we understand we're part of a competitive process, and your projects will be evaluated when they come in. But once something is funded, we really do want to work with you on seeing it be a success. And so while you just may have a 1-year project or a 2-year project, the long-term impacts are going to be 5 years out, so that's where David can come in and work with you on thinking about how we might collect that data later on, or just even to think it through really carefully. The other thing I really want to point out is that we do want to stay informed and hear about how your project's going. And I want to say that now, really early on, that this is not a really strict hierarchical structure in which you have to hide something if it's not going very well. We much like to hear earlier on how things are going. And if you have questions about the RFA, please feel free to reach out to David, especially he can talk through your evaluation design, or if you have questions for me about the RFA, we'd be happy to answer them. So we're available for that for you, and keeping it within the structure of being fair and unbiased. So I'll turn it back over to David. Thank you.
So these slides I've shown you so far are based on USDA NIFA evaluation templates. And we also look to the University of Wisconsin Extension. This is a logic model that is circulating all over the nation, it seems, including on the USDA NIFA site. So again, we're looking at program development, planning, implementation, evaluation, and we look at our situation with a needs assessment oftentimes, and then we consider what inputs we need to invest. So what we need to invest could be staff, volunteers, time, money, research base, materials, equipment, technology, partners. And from those investments of the inputs, we get outputs. And those are our activities, what we do, and participation in those activities. So as an evaluator, I would like to help you measure those activities. Who are you reaching? How many people? What is the knowledge change? What are they learning? Are they adopting new practices as a result of the outreach or the output? And then long-term, again, we're looking at short-term, medium-term, and long-term outcomes. And eventually, the longest term is impacts, where we're looking at condition changes on the social, economic, civic, and environmental spheres. Going to advance to a generic logic model for NIFA reporting. And many of you have probably already seen these before, but it's the same basic idea. We have inputs such as faculty, staff, students, infrastructure, our time, and then we use those inputs to create activities, and then we have outputs from the activities and eventually outcomes. So I'm just putting these here for your reference, but things don't always go as planned. So I'll give you just a moment to take a look at this cartoon, because it has some humor with a message that I'd like to share. I'll give you just one moment to read it. So as you can see, often we as evaluators and evaluation committees want logic models. We put out logic models with templates, with these very linear assumptions that things are controllable within our projects and targeted destinations. But as you can see, this guy ended up discovering or innovating a wheel, and maybe that wasn't the intention of his original project. And within the logic model, it didn't show that it had any use, but clearly wheels help us to get all kinds of destinations. So I saw the humor in this and thought it was appropriate, because often we start our logic models in complex situations, such as agroecosystems, with lots of variables that are unpredictable, and it's often difficult to even repeat experiments because field conditions change, weather changes, etc. But we start with a plan. We have our inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, impacts, following a vision or a mission. But as you know, the best laid plans often don't go as well as we'd like, or we end up with unanticipated or unintended consequences. Nevertheless, we try to do formative and summative evaluations, formative being during the process, summative being at the end, looking at outcomes and impacts. So even though we may plan our logic model this way, in reality, in complex situations, it can turn out more like this, where activities start to lead to all kinds of outcomes that we never predicted. So the reason I show this is because we expect that although you're thinking through these things with a logic model, that in reality, the project may take a different course, have unexpected, unanticipated outcomes. There could be unintended consequences. And we would like you, nevertheless, to have a robust evaluation plan to deal with those in real time and to consult with us and partner with us. You don't have to hide if outcomes aren't going the way you planned. Rather, we'd like to help you document what those outcomes are, what people are learning, what you're learning, because that could be the next innovation for the future.
Could be the new wheel.
The new wheel, yes.
So you had a great example of this that you told me earlier.
Yeah, so one of the projects we funded was Chang Lu at Rutgers. He's looking at house mice infestations, and he, in his logic model and in his research plan, was going to use 2 different industrially used baits, blank baits that don't have any toxins in them. One was solid, one was liquid, to attract mice to the traps. Then when he was going to compare that data to interview data on house mouse infestation levels, and what he found is that the mice weren't attracted to these industrially used baits at all, neither the liquid nor the solid. And so he just thought he would try something new. For that circumstance, he tried chocolate, and chocolate worked better than any of the industrially used baits that he had planned to use, and it was more accurate than the social science data, the interview data. So now he's changed his whole research program around chocolate as the preferred bait. And so we're shifting gears with him. So that's an example of how things can go in an unexpected way, but we wouldn't want him to hide that fact from us. He communicated it with us, and we're going to work with him to help evaluate the new plan. So this is known as developmental evaluation, or real-time evaluation, emergent evaluation. These are terms that are floating around. And you'll see Michael Quinn Patton, who's a well-known professional evaluator. He's put out these slides to demonstrate how developmental evaluation, which is the title of one of his books from 2011 that you'll find in our references, is the new wave of evaluation that takes into account the complexity of situations and allows for more real-time measures of outputs that were not anticipated from the beginning, and thus allows us to learn as we go. So please check out the references section. He also put out these slides through the Minnesota Evaluation Studies Institute, and you'll find many other presentations that are very helpful for evaluation. That being said, there are some research projects that are straightforward and have relatively clear, predictable connections, cause and effect relationships that we're going to test. So for those, the traditional logic model applies, and it holds true throughout the project. And even if you suspect that you might be in a complex situation that requires the developmental evaluation, we'd like you still to think through, to the best of your ability, what your inputs are going to be, what your expected outputs are going to be, and what the long-term impacts are going to be and outcomes. So I end with where I began, so that you could see that we want to encourage you to do this, but take into account that as partners, we're willing to work with you and encourage you to reveal unexpected outcomes if they do happen. Here are those references: developmental evaluation, systems thinking, and complexity science. It's from the Minnesota Evaluation Studies Institute, where Michael Patton presented, and this is his book if you're interested in reading further. We have a few more reference slides. This is a link that will take you to a page that is also on the RFAs, and it has suggested links for evaluation and planning. These are links to many of the images that you saw today in my portion of the presentation. And we want to remind you there will be an archive of today's webinar in case you want to watch it again. It will be available to view on demand in a few business days. It takes us a little while to edit. So this is the link to the webinar, and you can watch as often as you like.
Okay, yep. And I've been told that hopefully the the recording will be up by the end of the week. So if you look first thing next week, you should be able to find it. And we have one question on the Q&A. Let me check what that is. Okay. No, sorry. That was a comment that David needed to be closer to the microphone. So I'm hoping it was well enough that you could hear. And if not, we can go through and re-record it, so it's not the end of the world. That is the end of the slide set that we have. And so if you have any questions about your project, now is a good time to bring that up. And I will just wait for a moment to see if any more questions pop up. And if not, we will close out the webinar. And so we'll just give it a moment. So you can find contact information for me and David on our website, and feel free to give us a call or send us an email. And sometimes people ask questions that I have to think about for a little bit, so I have to get back to you. And but we'll both be happy to be a resource for you in the process. And I don't see any more questions that are coming up. Oh, yes, we do. Okay. So can we apply for the Issues RFA to request funding for part of a larger IPM project? The answer to that is yes, but it has to be able to go ahead regardless of a larger project. So, for example, you may already have funding for the larger project, and this is an additional side piece of it. That would be fine. If there's any question of the funding not being currently available for the larger project, that would be tricky, because we could give you funding and then you wouldn't be able to do the project if some piece fell apart. One of the important things that reviewers look at is that each of the objectives is standalone. So you don't have objectives that build on each other. So, if you don't accomplish objective 1, then does that mean you can't do objective 2 and 3? And so this question kind of feeds into that, is if it's part of a larger project, what is the impact? What is the relationship between the larger project and your issues proposal? And if the larger project should fail in some way, or the funding be pulled, could this stand alone and you still have successful results? So that was one of the flags you're really going to want to be careful. And I would also make sure that is very clearly and explicitly stated several times in the proposal, so that the reviewers don't miss it, because that will be one of their big questions. So hopefully, Eleanor, that answered your question. And if not, give me a call. I'll be happy to expand on that some more. And it looks like we don't have any more questions, so feel free to email me or David if you do, or our director, Deb Grantham. Any of us are happy to help you. And with that, we'll call it the end of the webinar. Thank you for taking the time to spend with us today, and just say bye and thanks.
Yes, thank you very much.
Great, lovely. Thanks very much.